Good morning to you. Today's address on the theme of the Bible as one of God's means of grace, one of the means by which He gets through to our minds and to our hearts and to our souls. It begins with an X-rated story. Seriously. In a town 15 miles from Brussels, the town of Vilvoet, on the 6th of October, a stake was driven into the ground. Then a condemned man was brought forward and tied to that stake. A large crowd gathered around. An executioner stepped forward and began the process of strangling to death the man whose hands and feet were bound. The executioner clutched the neck of his victim between his fingers and his thumbs, and he squeezed his windpipe until the man suffocated. When he was sure that he was dead, other men brought bundles of brushwood and put them around the still warm body of the man who had been killed, and then they set fire to it. They burned his body to ashes. Is this a new and murderous campaign by Islamic State? Has the condemned man committed some awful crime? Perhaps he's a mass murderer. Maybe he has had a long history of corrupting children and abusing them. Who could possibly deserve to die like this? William Tyndale was the man's name. He had translated the Bible into English, and he was executed by strangulation for his crime in 1536. Translating the Bible? What could be so dangerous about this book that men feared it being read? What could be so explosive about its contents that others were willing to translate it at the risk of their lives being taken from them? The Bible. A book like no other. A collection of 66 books inside the one book, and all with a single message. This is Bob Gass's comment about it. No publisher commissioned it. No committee outlined it. No earthly editor oversaw it. Though separated by 16 centuries and penned by an unlikely assortment of kings, soldiers, shepherds, farmers and fishermen, from Moses in the Arabian desert to John on the windswept island of Patmos, one theme threads the Bible together. That theme is salvation through Jesus Christ. Bob Gass has put his finger on two extremely important truths about the Bible. Truth number one, that the Bible is God-given. The Bible has not been written at the initiative of any one particular person who conceived of a great story and then put it down on paper. This is no book of speculations, nor a collection of human opinions and philosophy. This is God adding to the revelation that He's already given of Himself through the world of nature. Now He's revealing Himself through the spiritual history of particular people. Initially through the descendants of one ancient man, one whom we call a patriarch, Abraham. In the Bible, God traces the history of humanity from the days of our innocence through a first act of disobedience in the Garden of Eden, and then He explores His own rescue plan, which He initiates through Abraham's bloodline. His book concludes with the glorious prospect of the final, complete, and eternal destruction of all evil, and the restoration of that innocence to humanity which has been lost. This is our fabulous Christian hope. Repeatedly, God instructs the various authors to write down what they've heard and seen. From the instruction to Moses in the early chapters of the Bible, write down these words, for I have made a covenant with you and with Israel. To the instructions to John in the last book of the Bible, write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true. Truth number 1, the Bible is God-given. Truth number 2, that the Bible has got only one theme throughout the 66 books, which is not of humanity looking for a distant God, but of God loving humanity so much that from the very first mistake in the Garden of Eden, he himself puts in train a rescue plan for lost humanity. The culmination of that rescue plan is the birth and then the sacrificial death of Jesus, the promised Messiah. The whole Bible, both Old Testament and New Testament, is telling the same story. This is the story which still today captures the hearts, minds, commitment and loyalty of more than 2 billion people. The major problem for contemporary society is how we can possibly believe this ancient book any longer. Hasn't science disproved it? Isn't it full of contradictions? Isn't it true that people can prove anything they want to prove by using the Bible? Why should it carry any more authority than any other ancient religious text? Isn't the Quran for the Muslims or the Bhagavad Gita for the Hindus just as important? Let me briefly answer these accusatory questions. Hasn't science disproved the Bible? Well, nowhere does the Bible make claims to be a scientific textbook. It's a spiritual textbook. Whenever it speaks, it's speaking from the scientific viewpoint of the ancient world, when different parts of it were written. So if we accuse the Bible for being 2,000 years old in some parts and 4,000 years old in other parts, where do we think our modern science will be in 2,000 to 4,000 years' time? Very different to today. Isn't the Bible full of contradictions? Have you noticed how the media love to pull down the wealthy and the celebrities and the politicians? They put the things that they say under a microscope and look for any inconsistencies which they can expose. They fact-check their claims. The statement that the Bible is full of contradictions has passed into common currency without thought or examination. Yes, there are passages that are hard to understand. Yes, there are events and people for whom we have no other independent evidence. But time and time again in the modern era, when the Bible has been fact-checked, it has been found to be remarkably accurate in the history that it records. Can't you prove anything that you want to from the Bible? Well, it is a vital part of biblical interpretation that we ensure that the texts which we quote are quoted within their context. During the recent presidential elections in the United States, both candidates were continually being quoted out of context by the separate campaign teams, with the deliberate intention of making them unelectable. When we read the Bible, we need to take a holistic approach to it, so that when we quote it, we are quoting the entire teaching which the Bible gives regarding a particular subject, not just drawing out a few sentences which favour our own particular viewpoint. But then there's the question, surely the Bible is no more authoritative in spiritual matters than any other holy book. Now here is a vitally important issue. We need to look at how we approach the Bible and how we read it, for that contains the answer to the question, how authoritative is it? Most of us tend to read a book from the beginning right through to the end. Unless, of course, we're reading a magazine in the hairdressers or checking the sports news in our daily papers, and therefore we go to the back pages first. If we think that we'll get to grips with the Bible by starting at the beginning, then we'll actually make a big mistake. Think of the Bible for a moment like a long drain pipe. 66 books within it. Don't enter the Bible at the top of the drain pipe or at the bottom, but rather go 2/3 of the way along its length and then make a hole in the side, and go in there. In other words, don't start with the Bible at the beginning, but start with the Bible when it gets to Jesus, when it gets to the 4 Gospels, and read them first. This is our doorway into the Bible. When we look at the Jesus we are meeting in the Gospels, we find that we have met the Son of the living God, the one who makes extraordinary claims for himself, claims which we Christians have come to believe are true. He talks about the Father who has sent me. He refers to the Scriptures which testify about me. This Jesus, who is the Son of the living God, speaks of the Bible, what we call our Old Testament. He speaks of that Bible as God-breathed, as true, as authoritative. He says that the Scriptures cannot be broken. He says that he's not come to bring some new truth for people to believe, but rather to reinforce the truth which is already written down. I tell you the truth, he says, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. What we have here is Jesus, the Son of God, who is himself speaking with greater authority than anyone, either before or since. Heaven and earth will pass away, he says, but my words will never pass away. So when other holy books are put alongside the Bible, we can clearly see which one has the greater authority. The one which Jesus, the Son of God, authorized, and to which he contributed by his life, his teaching, his ministry, his death, and resurrection. This point is reinforced still further by his apostles, who wrote after his resurrection. Here is Paul pressing the matter home. For what I received, he writes, I passed on to you as of first importance, that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the 3rd day according to the Scriptures. So Jesus authenticated those Scriptures. Now, I've never come across a painter or decorator who begins repapering a wall assuming that the corners are perfectly vertical. They know from experience that they never are. So included in their toolbox is a plumb line. Plumb lines have been used by architects and builders for millennia. They are one of the tools which have been continually used until today, and are a piece of ancient wisdom which has been passed down from generation to generation. If we want spiritual guidance or moral guidance, we need to go to the plumb line of the Bible. Not to try to bring the Bible into line with society or our contemporary culture, but rather to bring our society and our culture into line with the Bible. Culture says, everybody's doing it. It must be fine. Tradition says, we've always done it this way, so it must be right. Reason says, it seems logical. Who can argue with that? Emotion says, it feels right today. But all of these are flawed. Culture, tradition, our emotions, even logic can be flawed. Get out the plumb line. That's the only flawless measuring tool. Get out the Bible. Amen.